Hello everyone, this is Jonathan Little, and I am thrilled today to bring you the live replay of the 2014 CardPlayer Poker Tour tournament that took place at the Bicycle Casino. This was a $1,000 buy-in event that had multiple day ones, or you could buy into day two for $4,000. So I believe they had something like 56 people buy in on day two. And there was a pretty good prize pool for that. Let me show you that real fast. Here were the payouts. First place was 175, second was 85, third was 56, 43, 33, 25, 20, 15, and $11,000. And here are the players. All of these players, besides two of them, seemed to have very little tournament success in terms of large buy-in events. The two who did have a lot of success were Amit. I actually don't know how to say his last name. Makhija? Amit Makhija? His name was Amac Online. He is a very well-known, I guess he's a live tournament player now, but he used to be an online tournament. We've been around probably roughly the same amount of time. And he's a very good player. I've played with him a lot. He generally plays tight, aggressive-ish, but he certainly knows how to mess around. And then the other player is a guy named Josh Hale, who won a $3,700 buy-in World Poker Tour event at the Bicycle Casino for $500,000. But besides that, he only has another $170,000 or so in cashes. So that makes me generally think that he's probably just a local guy who, plays poker locally. Everyone else at this table primarily played smaller buy-in events. Either that or they just have not had much success in the larger buy-in events. So let's go ahead and get to it. The blinds are currently 25,000 and 50,000 with a 5,000 ante. There are 9 players left. And I have not watched any of this. I don't know what any of these players look like. I don't know any of their styles, but we'll just do it on the fly and see how things go. All right, so it looks like this guy is Tim. Let's take a look at Tim. That's not what I need. Tim is Tim Kramer. He has 820,000 in chips, so that means he has, we'll call it 16 big blinds. And he has ace-2 suited in the small blind. So with this stack size, I think just going all in is perfectly fine. Oh, I'm sorry. So he doesn't have a million. Okay, I was thinking, does he have 200 big blinds? But no, he just has 18. So I think I would probably just go all in from the small blind most of the time, unless I knew the player in the big blind was just very bad, either by being way too crazy or way too straightforward. If he's super straightforward, I would certainly, I would certainly raise with the intention of folding to a shove. So interesting, this player is Donald. Let's take a look at Donald's information. Donald is not even on here. That must be a nickname. I guess we'll see how many chips he has. It says he has 4 million. So this guy is the chip leader. So Adam. Adam is Donald. Let's remember that. I would definitely just go all in into the big blind. I think that's by far the best play. I'm actually sort of surprised that Donald did not just go all in when facing the raise. Actually, Tim did not raise. Tim limped. So, and I actually think limping is okay. That being said, I would have just gone all in. And Donald decides to check. It's a little bit weird. I think I would raise with the pocket sixes, primarily for value. Pocket sixes are in fantastic shape. It seems like the graphics are not quite lined up in terms of what happened pre-flop. As you see, it says it was raised to 11K. Obviously, that's not what happened. So I suppose we'll just give it a little bit of time for Live at the Bike to catch up with everything. This is a scenario, the flop came king, king 3, where I'm definitely not folding the pocket 3s. Okay, so it does look like Tim raised pre-flop. I definitely would have gone all in with pocket 6s once Tim raises pre-flop. You're going to be able to apply a ton of pressure with your pocket 6s. And if you get called, it's never really that big of a deal. The problem with calling pre-flops is there are a lot of flops that are very bad for Donald. Because, I mean, just say the flop is king, queen, 4, you cannot happily continue. And on the boards that you can happily continue, sometimes you're still going to be beat. Like, say it comes 7-4-2. That's a pretty good flop for pocket sixes, but you still could just easily be crushed. So I think Donald should have certainly gone all in pre-flop. As played, I'm definitely not folding the flop. Anytime you can shove for around 7 or 8 times the initial raise, so in this case 800K or so, it's a fantastic spot to shove because you have a ton of fold equity, meaning your opponent's going to fold a lot of the time. And when you do get called, it's not really that big of a deal, especially when you have a pretty good hand. All right, so anyways, I don't think Donald should raise. I think that's going to allow Tim to play reasonably well. I think calling is the only option on King, King 3. So it looks like Tim made a small bet, which is interesting. He bet very tiny. I still like the call. I don't think there's any reason to raise. If I was in Tim's shoes, I would just continue betting now that he turns the flush draw. I think either you need to bet or you need to check with the intention of check shoving. I think check calling is not a very good option. If I was in Donald's shoes right here, I would just check behind and plan on calling most river bets. I think betting is okay, but whenever your opponent continues, whenever your opponent continues, I don't think you're going to be able to continue. You're not going to be in too good of shape. It looks like he just made a bet of 150K and his opponent folded. That would be very tight, assuming that is what happened. I definitely cannot comprehend folding the nut flush draw on this board and in a spot where ace high could easily be good. I mean, it wasn't good this time, but I think ace high is going to be good a pretty good amount of the time. I mean, that's just... I would quantify that as shocking. I do not really understand why Tim would fold the ace-2 suited. Maybe the graphics are wrong. Maybe he had ace-2 offsuit or something like that. But that's a scenario where your hand is occasionally good, and when it's not, you have the flush draw. So I would have either bet with the intention of folding to a shove, which is unfortunate, or check with the intention of check shoving. I think that would have been a much better play. I set this thing up to be in a playlist, so let's see if we can skip directly to hand 2. I believe that guy is Josh Hale, the one who won the WPT. Just a FYI. This guy, I don't know who this player is, but he looks familiar. I think he's probably played live at the bike a time or two. So Amit raised with pocket fives from middle position to 110,000, which is 2 point something big blinds. I've actually been working on something where I have been raising a little bit bigger whenever I want my opponents to fold, and I typically want my opponents to fold whenever I'm playing against good players. I don't want them to call a min raise out of position because they're getting great odds. It's not like they're actually making an error. So against players like that, I want them to fold. If my opponents are weak, and just judging from my brief amount of research on this final table, some of these players are probably pretty weak. I want to be min raising because I don't care if they call because they're not going to play well after the flop. If your opponent is going to play well after the flop, you don't really want them in. You'd much rather them just fold. But if they are going to play poorly, you definitely want them in. So I'd be min raising at this table for sure. And looks like Amit wins the blinds. That's Amit right here. He's a very good online player. He's been around the block. So this guy is Douglas, it seems. Yeah, so this is Josh. So we have Douglas and Josh. Let's take a look at the chip counts really fast. So Amit has 30 big blinds. Douglas has, I suppose this is Douglas, has only 15 big blinds, so it's pretty short. And Josh has 3.3 million, which is 70 big blinds. So Adam, although I already forgot his other name, Cody, Zahir, and Josh all have a lot of chips. Everyone else is relatively short stack, so we'll just keep that in mind as we proceed. I would definitely raise in Josh's spot. Again, I would be min raising, but you can really do whatever you want. I don't think it's too big of a deal when stacks are relatively deep to be making various raise sizes. Cody folds. So Cody is to the left of Josh. And so given the fact that Cody's to Josh's left, if I was in Josh's shoes with 3.3 million, I would actually be pretty tight if I thought Cody was going to be playing aggressively versus me. But I don't think that we have any reason to believe that currently. Whenever you have a good but not amazing stack, but the guy to your left has more chips than you have to be very careful when it comes to raising with a wide range. I would definitely consider re-raising pretty wide if I was the chip leader in this scenario, because that's going to apply a lot of pressure to Josh. So again, I'm primarily discussing individual chip modeling considerations. I mean, there are huge payout jumps between last and first. I mean, ninth place is only $11,000, which is not even that much in terms of buy-ins. There's only 10 buy-ins if you bought in at the beginning of the tournament. And first is a lot, 175. So no one who has a lot of chips is going to want to bust early. And because of that, you can apply a lot of pressure on them. All right, so anyways, Josh raises. Here has Queen Jack offsuit in the small blind. I think this is a very easy fold. Hands like Queen Jack do not need to be defended from the small blind. Let's take a look at the name again. So Zahir also has a big stack. Even with this big stack, I would not call this. I think you either need to 3-bet or fold pretty much exclusively. And the reason you don't really want to play hands like Queen Jack, particularly out of position, is because very often they're just dominated. So unless your opponent is opening a very wide range, you can't really expect to have the best hand too often, and you're also not likely to flop the best hand. So I definitely hate this call, even though he's getting pretty good odds. And then Pac-Man. Who in the world is Pac-Man? So Pac-Man started with 1.6 in chip. So who has 1.6? So San is Pac-Man. Okay. So he has about a 32 big blind stack. If I was in his shoes, closing the action, I probably would call the Queen 9. Mainly because you're getting very good odds. You have to expect to be dominated some percentage of the time, but getting such an amazing price, one big blind to win 6 or so, it's fine just to put in the one more big blind and proceed from there. But he folded. Obviously a great flop for Josh with the straight and flush draw. It's not a straight flush draw, but it's a straight and a flush draw. And Zahir should probably be in check fold mode unless Josh bets really small. I think Zahir could also consider check raising, but that's fairly spewy. Looks like he's taking his time. He has an interesting poker face going. Oh, maybe maybe snap check. Maybe he did the opposite of taking his time. All right, so the pot's 285K. If I was in Josh's shoes, I'd probably just bet 150K or so. Your opponent's not going to fold if he has an ace or a 10, but if he has much worse than that, he's probably going to fold every time. I actually don't think checking behind is that bad in Josh's shoes. If you plan to check it down a lot, I think that's fine. Check it down when you miss, I mean. If you think you can have the best hand when it goes check, when it checks down, checking behind's fine. But given he has a flush draw, I think you definitely want to bet. If Josh had something like King, Queen of Spades, I'd be much happier checking behind on this board, because if you bet and your opponent calls, you probably have the worst hand. And if you bet and he folds, you probably had the best hand and you made him fold some hand that you're doing pretty well against. So I think if you do check behind, you need to try to get the showdown, meaning you probably need to call a bet. But with the flush draw, you definitely just want to bet. And if I was in Zahir's shoes, I would for sure just fold. You're not doing very well against your opponent's range at all. Your opponent's range is going to be mostly aces, 10s, and big pairs. Unless Josh is crazy. Again, it's very worth mentioning that I do not know anything about these players. All I know is that Josh has won a WPT, so he's probably active enough. But how is Zahir planning to win this hand at this point? So is he going to be check raising random turns? I think that's pretty optimistic. Is it going to be leading random turns? Like, say the club comes, is he going to lead? That seems pretty optimistic as well. Actually, this is a really bad turn for Zahir, because he just picked up a lot of equity in his mind, but he's actually drawing dead. So if he leads in this spot, Josh for sure needs to call. I don't think Josh should ever fold an ace in this scenario. Let's see if we can make out these chips. So one blue and a bunch of brown ones. So let's pay attention to how much he actually bet. He bet 180K. So 180K. So these must be 25,000 chips, and the blues must be 5,000. So we're going to assume that is the case. Brown ones are 25K, blue ones are 5K. I'm assuming there are 7, is that right? Yeah, 7 brown ones and 1 blue one. Okay, so given the stack depth, right, notice that these players both have effectively the same stack. What should Josh do? He obviously has the best hand, right? He has to figure out, if I raise, can my opponent conceivably call with many worse hands? And if I call, will my opponent decide to randomly spaz out and try to bluff me. And I don't really know the answer to this. This is a pretty tricky spot because, like, what should Zahir be leading with on this turn? I think the answer is nothing, but you'll find that most players, when they lead, they tend to have a marginal made hand or a draw. And against both those hands, if Josh raises, he's probably going to make his opponent fold. So I think Josh should call. I hate calling in this spot because you definitely want to play a large pot, but you have to realize your opponent's drawing stone dead with this whole range, and his range just cannot be that strong. And if Zahir does have a flush already, he's going to bet the river, you're going to raise, and he's going to call. So you're going to be able to play a pretty big pot either way. So I don't love this spot, but I think Josh needs to just call. Looks like he's raising, though. So this looks like it's going to be about 400K. So let's see what it says this bet is, just to make sure we have the chip stacks correct. So yeah, 420K. So good. We have figured it out. He raises small. I don't really like this for the reasons I just stated. Zahir should easily fold, even with his... Well, should he easily fold? At this point, he has to put in 240 to try to win 1.2. So 6-1 to draw to a draw that could not necessarily be good. I think this is just such a bad reverse implied odd spot that Zahir needs to fold. And I'm not saying that just because Josh has king-queen. I think Josh is going to have an ace a lot of the time, or he's going to have something like ace-jack with the... I guess he can't have ace-jack with the jack of clubs. Sort of, I guess he could have ace-king or ace-queen with the king or queen of clubs. The problem that Zahir is going to have is that he has no clue which of his outs are clean. And anytime you don't know which of your outs are clean, you don't really want to apply aggression. It looks like he might be re-raising. Maybe. And this is just crazy. At this point, I would definitely just call if I was Josh. And the reason for that is because, again, you want to keep your opponent in this hand. You definitely do not want him to fold. So he raised to 660K. So just a min re-raise. Wow. I mean, it's probably worth noting right here that I have no clue what's going on at this point. I mean, this is just blatantly bonkers. Josh should call. I think if he raises, he's going to allow his opponent to get off the hook unless he has a flush. And if his opponent does have a flush, you're going to win some amount off of him on the river anyways. Even if the board pairs, your opponent's not just going to check fold. So I definitely like calling. Again, my main concern whenever I have the nuts in this scenario is not letting my opponent fold. It's really interesting to me that he's spazzing out already on the first hand or second hand or third hand of this tournament, of this final table. Also, notice that if Josh puts in another 240K, the pot's going to be 2 million, and both players have roughly 2 million behind, so I don't think it's inconceivable that Zahir just shoves the river, whether he hits or not. And if Zahir checks the river, I think Josh should go all in to try to look as bluffy as possible. Josh wants to look like he has the king of clubs and is thinking, man, this is rough. What am I going to do? If the river pairs the board and your opponent checks, what should Josh do? These are all things I'm thinking about ahead of time before I make my play. If the river pairs and the opponent checks, I would probably check behind at a final table if I was Josh. That may sound a little bit nitty, but it's somewhat likely your opponent does have a boat and doesn't think you'll pay him off. Of course, he could have a flush, but he may fold the flush. Maybe the play is to bet small, but if you bet small, you open the door to get raised. So I think this is one of the rare spots in a tournament where I would play pretty nitty on the river, wherever it goes, whenever your opponent checks with the second nut flush, if the board pairs. If the river's a blank and your opponent checks, I would go all in and try to make it look like I was running a bluff. I would try to look as bluffy as possible. You'll find that in general, when players take a very long time and then raise, they almost always have a very good hand. Amateur players in general. It looks like he went all in, which is a disaster. And his opponent folds. I definitely do not like this play because it allows the opponent to play perfectly, and the opponent did play perfectly. It does look somewhat bluffy. Maybe Josh just has the king of clubs and is running a bluff, but that's somewhat optimistic. But he wins a nice pot, and he makes it very difficult to lose because he's not going to get outdrawn by various sets too often, and if he does get outdrawn, it's just unlucky. So there is value in tournaments and just winning the pots, more so than in cash games. Way more so than in cash games, because you definitely want to not risk your stack, because if you go broke, you can't play anymore. Whereas in cash games, if you go broke, you can continue playing. You just get more money out. So stealing the pot is never as bad as it may appear, but in that spot, you have to recognize your opponent's drawing super thin, so you don't want to let the opponent off the hook. All right, Tim just open shoves, 800K, and this seems like a pretty easy call from Donald. I don't think he needs to re-raise. My general strategy whenever someone open jams is to call if it's around 7 big blinds or more, and min re-raise if it's around 6 big blinds or less. You'll find that people behind you are not going to call 7 big blinds with air, and they're certainly not going to call 14 big blinds with air, or 16 big blinds like this is. So I would just call, and if someone behind re-raises, I would probably fold, unless I think my opponents are just crazy. So it looks like he did just call. I like that a lot. Obviously, someone behind could shove, and then that would allow them to get heads up, which would be unfortunate because they could effectively put in 790K and have a lot of fold equity, but whatever. I don't think they're going to do that too often because it's very high risk. It's also worth noting I would play aces and kings and queens and jacks and ace king the exact same way in Donald's spot, and I think my range is actually going to be somewhat balanced because it's not like I'm just calling there were too many hands. I'm probably going to call something like eights or better and ace queen. And I suppose roughly half of those I would fold to a shove and half of those I would call a shove. So, and whenever I do call the shove, my opponent's going to be in very bad shape. So I don't really care how this runs out. We actually don't need to see that kind of thing. It's worth mentioning I don't care how the board runs out. Hopefully I can train you about that throughout this video. Whenever you get it all in, you get it all in. And in this spot, I don't think either player did anything bad. I think Tim needed to shove with his king jack. I think that's by far a fine, unexploitable play. I probably would have min raised if I was him, because I would assume that I would play decently well after the flop. But not knowing anything about him or the other opponents, I think shoving is certainly fine. All right, so just like that, we're down to 8, and Tim got 11K. So definitely not the finish he wanted, but it is what it is. If I do not go through these hands faster, this could be an incredibly long video. All right, so Cody raises. We don't know who Cody is yet. John. Is this guy John or is this guy Pac-Man? We'll evaluate. We'll see what happens. All right, so maybe that guy's John. Maybe that guy's not Pac-Man. Who is John? Let's see. There's a guy named John Apaken. I guess that's him. Maybe I got Pac-Man wrong. Oh, this guy's Pac-Man. Okay, yeah, so this guy's Pac-Man. All right, I apparently had that completely wrong. I like this 3-bet from John on with pocket twos. I think calling's also fine if you expect to get calling's great if you don't expect to get shoved on. If you expect to get shoved on, you probably want to be re-raising or even folding these hands. I know that probably sounds a little bit nitty, but even with somewhat deep stacks, if you're going to get shoved on a lot, you just do not want to call. So Douglas is actually fairly short stacked. So let's see who. Yeah, so Doug is the guy with the fewest chips. I hope you guys don't mind me referring back to the chip stacks and whatnot, because that is very important, and it's sort of difficult to quantify without actually studying the table for a while. And so in this spot, Cody raised. This must be Cody. Okay, so let's check out Cody's stack. Cody has a bunch of chips. So Cody's raising, and John is re-raising. All right, so two somewhat deep stacks. That's actually a pretty strong raise from John because it applies a pretty good amount of pressure, and it looks really strong. Notice he did re-raise somewhat large as well. I probably would have re-raised a little bit smaller if Cody raised to look like 120K pre-flop. I would probably have made it through to 80K or so, because you don't really care if he calls and then check folds on a lot of flops. And I don't know if that's the type of player this guy looks like. This guy's probably somewhat active, just looking from appearances. But yeah, I would be okay with that. And also it makes your bluffs cheaper. So should Cody re-raise? I mean, if he really feels like getting crazy, I think shoving would not be so insane. I mean, I know it sounds insane, but if you think your opponent's 3-betting you a lot, like say this John player's 3-bet Cody a ton over the last day, I would be fine with a shove. But as played, I think folding is really the only realistic option, and that is what he does. So nice play. Also, as a lot of stacks get shorter, meaning people are going to be shoving on you more, it becomes slightly better to be min raising instead, assuming you don't think your raise size is going to alter your opponent's shoving frequencies. If you think raising larger will make your opponents shove way less often, then raising larger becomes actually very, very good. All right, from the cutoff, I would for sure fold Jack 3. Amit's going to raise this on the button when everyone folds to him. Pretty easy raise spot. And if I was in, so this guy is Douglas, I would fold the 10-6 suited and I would defend with the King 4 suited as Josh does. So good play by Josh so far, I think. I'm becoming a much bigger fan of calling min raises. I mean, notice that if Amit just made it, I don't know, 140k preflop, he probably would have gotten Josh to fold or 3-bet. As played, now he lets Josh play a hand that's very concealed. All right, so this is something that a lot of online players are doing. They're playing in their minds. This is actually a somewhat game theory optimal way of playing, where you're checking behind with stuff that could easily be good and betting with stuff that's either really good or not good at all. And in this spot, ace high is a reasonably good hand, so Amit's trying to get to showdown with this hand. Josh, on the other hand, now is the nuts. He should definitely bet, I think. It's somewhat likely that Amit has a showdown value hand when he checks behind the flop, and he's probably not going to bet those on the turn too often. I mean, he could, but if he does bet them on the turn, he's only going to bet the turn and then check behind the river. So the only way Josh is going to get multiple streets of value is to bet the turn and bet the river. I think if he check raises, unless he's playing really crazy, he's not going to get too much action. As you see, Amit just checks behind like I think he should. Also, this is another bad thing that could happen for Josh. The board could run out just horribly. And now on the river, Josh for sure needs to check. So now Amit has to figure out, should I bluff this? And I think the answer is actually yes, because your opponent is sort of capped at having a mediocre flush or worse. Of course, he's not going to fold a flush to a bet, but he probably will fold all one pair hands. I don't know if he'll fold a king. I actually think I would be check calling with a king a lot of the time, depending on how large the opponent bet. I think I would probably bet pretty big if I was in Amit's shoes, because you definitely want your opponent to consider folding the bad flushes and the one pair hands. Like, you don't want to bet something like 50k and have your opponent call you with a 9 or a 7. That would be a disaster. So if I'm going to bet, I would bet something like 200k. I think that would look fairly strong. Yeah, that's what I would do. I'd be betting something like 200k in this spot. I don't think ace high has enough showdown value to I don't think ace high has enough showdown value to check behind here. I think your opponent's gonna have a random one pair hand too often, and you're gonna lose to those. Always make sure you don't muck a flush. I know that, I think it was Will the Thrill folded the best hand at some WPT final table, and it cost him World Poker Tour Player of the Year, which sounds insane, but story checks out. It actually happened.